Yes, sir, way in the back. It was the sunglasses, yes.
About paranoid schizophrenics, bowel movements, and cosmic myths. I know you like this person, so I want to quote, "But love has pitched his mansion in the house of excrement. Nothing can be sold nor whole,
which has not been rent." Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think that sums it all up.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's close to what R.D. Laing was trying to say in the 60s, that the psychotic, I think he went too far to one extreme of making the schizophrenic a culture hero. But the whole notion that that out of the rupture of the psyche can come, you know, sensitivity and awareness is certainly something I wouldn't disagree. And Yeats, whom you're quoting, celebrates Crazy Jane, and so he has very much the mad tinkers, and it's very Irish. Yeah.
You criticize the New Age, and there are many ways you can say it, but I think one of the primary ways you can say it is the way you've been saying it and the way Yeats said it, because I see, and I'd like you to comment on this, I see the main problem with the New Age is not being able to look at the dark side and not being able to see that nothing can be whole unless it is rent.
Yeah, no,
The terrible vision for them, and that's exactly in the last place they think of looking, where they have to look to complete their spirituality.
Yeah, no, I think this is true. And at one level, before the New Age got merchandised in the 80s and the Reagan era, I would, I guess, have been not uncomfortable being called New Age, because I would think of Goethe and Steiner and Nicholas Roerich and W.B. Yeats and William Blake and you know, Freemasonry and Mozart and the Magic Flute, and I'd think of that all as the architecture of the New Age movement, which is part of a political liberation movement of kind of the individual and the Protestant Reformation against king and cardinal and the ultramontane powers of the Counter-Reformation. And so politically I would identify with that. But then in the 80s, it just got so hyped and so sold, and you know, Purple Crystals and Shirley MacLaine on the cover of Time, that it became aesthetically repellent to me. So I split and went off and was working with Varela on Buddhism and neuroscience, and my son, and working on this book that they just published called The Embodied Mind, Cognitive Science and Human Experience. But at another level, yeah, I think David Spangler and I did a talk book from some sort of summer chautauquas we did up in the Pacific Northwest on the critique of the New Age, called The Reimagination of the World, and there's a long kind of feeling of how I feel about it and how he feels about it and the rest of the world. Yes?
I'm a little tired, so this might not make sense, but it seems to me that deconstruction ought to be critiqued as well, as it too is a conspiracy against literacy.
I think so, in the sense that I get an imaginary landscape. I talk about Roland Barthes and the death of the author, and the whole problem of trying to eliminate the authorial voice. That for me, in the sociology of knowledge, this was when the Romantic artists, the viability, economic viability of the artist was ending. You know, I think perhaps maybe Thomas Mann was the last artist to be able to live off his royalties. And then there came the generation of professors of English literature who were salaried by the state. And as they rose to power, you got a rationalization of their power with a celebration of criticism as being more important than art. And so you got, and this was the 60s, and this was right at the time of Roland Barthes. And I have a lot of problems with that, and I certainly don't like deconstructionism in architecture. I think it's really decadent and just a, you know, very shallow kind of trend. But it became much more an academic cult. The argument I make on Disney is that while the academics were retreating into sort of semiotic and deconstructionist cults, Disneyism, which would be held in contempt, was actually externalizing and spreading around the world from Tokyo to even to Paris. Now that's fascinating in itself, because Jack Lang, when he became Minister of Culture under Mitterrand, started his whole thing as attacking the Americanization of the planet and its vulgarity. He ended up welcoming Disney World because it's the largest investment in the history of France, the largest infusion of foreign capital. And it's the real secret of the Gulf War, because Attali and all the others were saying, look, Germany is going to take the northern route and reintegrate the Baltics and maybe even Russia into the new northern economic power. What are we French going to do? We've got to go for the sources of energy and make the Islamic underbelly the passionate body, but the brain will be in Paris. And so they had this whole thing of selling Mirage and nuclear technologies to Saddam Hussein. And the whole notion was to create le centre du monde arabe. They built that palace right in Paris. But so that was their policy. And then they found in the war that here Bush and Major were doing their thing. France was getting left out. And they had to choose between the American investment with Disneyland or trying to sell to Saddam Hussein. They jumped their foreign policy, got rid of their Minister of Defense, and ran after Major and Bush and changed their foreign policy, overnight. So Disneyland, trivial, irrelevant, is actually not, But if you asked a professor of literature why Disneyism is beneath contempt, it's not serious. But as a civic religion, this is why I argue it's a kind of variant of Mormonism. It really is a 20th century version, continuation of Mormonism. It's a civic religion. So it has to be taken seriously. Part of this, the way in which the book, what it does is as important as what it says, is, on the one hand, you have the California extreme of the memo and slang and sort of Howard Rheingold's statement that literary essays are not the appropriate means for discussing new and revolutionary technologies. On the other extreme in Europe, you have Habermas and Derrida, who, from my Irish-American point of view, are almost unreadable. Now, what I'm trying to do somewhere in the middle of those, maybe that's why I'm in New York, and I'm trying to relate my California youth and my, European middle age into some synthesis. This is an attempt to write serious philosophy that's funny, that is just witty and accessible and about things, because the basic trope of European philosophy is to be inaccessible, to be incomprehensible, to make you feel stupid so that it empowers the professor or the critic. And I just say no, I'm not going to do that. I give you one chance, I'll give someone else a chance.
Some of our lifetimes, I remember the old argument C.P. Snow brought up. But when he was talking about the two cultures, he was talking about the literary culture and the scientific culture. Have you given any thought now, beyond the technological one, what about the scientific culture?
I think that's a very good question. Actually, John Brockman, who's a literary agent who runs a thing called the Reality Club in New York, is writing a book about that very issue that you're describing. And he basically says literary culture died and that the scientists just, went directly to the public, like Lewis Thomas or Stephen Jay Gould or popularizers. Whenever there's a scientific cover article in Time magazine, it sells twice as many copies as, say, a cover article on politics. So he thinks this is because people are more empirical, and I said, no, not the case. The scientists are mythologists for our culture. They're asking big questions, and they're giving big answers of who we are, where we come from, where we're going. So they're the myth makers of our time, and that's why they carry on a kind of bardic function. What happened to me when I quit the university is most of my colleagues actually in Lindisfarne are scientists. They're people like the neuroscientist Francisco Varela, the bacteriologist Lynn Margulis, the atmospheric chemist Jim Lovelock. So all of these people come together, and we share a kind of sense of planetary dynamics. There's a sense of the bacterial bioplasm with Lynn, the atmosphere and Gaia with Jim Lovelock, the immune system with Varela. And though there are poets in Lindisfarne, like Gary Snyder, Wendell Berry, Kathleen Raine, but the actual reimagination of the world, for me, is more coming from my scientific colleagues than my poetic colleagues. So most of the time when I'm talking to Wendell, we're always arguing. And most of the time when I'm talking to the scientists, our imaginations are on fire and we're zapping one another. So it's a paradox. So I think there's a third culture, and it's beyond C.P. Snow's two cultures. But I couldn't do it at MIT. I really tried, but it just wasn't possible. Now, of course, it's a different generation, and you might be able to do it at Berkeley or, But certainly, I think I wouldn't advise any of you to quit the university and set up alternative institutions. I think that was something fey that was just part of my generation in the 70s, inspired by Illich and all of that. And I think it's marginalized its impact, and it's probably not a viable political thing to do.